Welcome to Journey Through the Eyes, the EMDR podcast. I am your host, Kathy Couch, and we are here in November. And we are so excited to be here. Our intention is to provide support to clinicians all over the world, even those that are trained in EMDR therapy. So we're here for the new and seasoned clinicians. Today, we have Rachel there as Badere out of San Diego. Her also discussed ideas today on people pleasing, and we're able to just introduce her, and we certainly appreciate her expertise in donating her time today. There, if you're watching live on Facebook, go ahead and comment if you have any questions. Otherwise, I will turn it over to Rachel, who can also introduce herself. She's with All People Counseling, sees teens, adults, and then of course, all people. So we're so happy to have you here today, Rachel. Um, could you give us a brief introduction of yourself and kind of a brief discussion of the topic?
Thank you for having me, Kathy. Send tomorrow my regards when you see her again.
Yeah.
So I thought it would be helpful to go over boundary setting and how to have freedom from people pleasing, especially coming up during the holidays. Um, and actually, I prefer she, they. So I just want to let that, I noticed that you said she, her, and that's okay too.
Oh,
Let you know
thank you
my
for that.
preference.
I wrote it. Oh, she, they, yes. I
No
wrote
problem.
that down and I said that wrong. Thank you.
Yeah. I work with a lot of people who are neurodivergent, also a lot of queer folks. And so these this population tends to have a lot of people pleasing behaviors because obviously we're masking all the time. Um, obviously we're different. So uh, in order to help break free from that, I just kind of, thought of some tips and tricks and how to have freedom from that and not be a slave to, societal pressures.
I think what you're saying is so important. I didn't really connect this idea in regards to people pleasing with the specific queer population, but I think that does make sense. I wanted to ask you how you compare that to the fawning response. Do you feel like people pleasing and the fawning response, which is, if for our listeners, is fight, flight, freeze, and then now we're exploring this fawning response. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that or not, and if not, I can kind of explain it. But it's similar to this idea. Do you have similarities between our topic today with people pleasing and the fawning response?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that it's maybe like a Venn diagram. So there's definitely a large portion of overlap with the fawning trauma response. Um, because people pleasing is shaped by our past experiences, that also includes experiences with trauma or where there was prejudice or you are excluded or ostracized.
Yeah.
It definitely plays a huge role in people pleasing in general.
So when you think about people pleasing, could you describe some of the experiences with patients that you've had or describe the concept in general? Then we're going to talk about some attachment styles, some boundaries, how to reduce it. I think you and I had the discussion about specifically this content was important around the holidays. Could you describe that for us just in general, people pleasing, and then we'll kind of go into some of those other topics?
Sure. I think, people pleasing, it's a strong urge to please others, and that can be even at your own expense. It's a power dynamic. So it's a differentiation where we actually lower our own value or self-worth and place someone above ours, and we appease to please. So by avoiding conflict, and you're actually taking the conflict onto yourself. And people pleasing and the fawning response, it's just, even shifting your personality and over identifying with others. So, but it's not, as helpful or as freeing as being able to assert your needs.
Why do you think this is really important during the holidays? Do you feel like it's just because of this involvement with families and maybe even like you had mentioned some of the ostracized, discriminated against people wanting to be accepted and loved.
Yeah. Well, people pleasing, one of the, telltale signs is if you have difficulty saying no, or feel guilty for prioritizing yourself, put yourself last, agreed, pretty agreeable, and generally people overcommit their responsibilities due to a fear of rejection. So, I mean, that's basically the holidays, right? You get several invites, you have to pick which ones align with you most. There's a lot of pressure from family members to attend like events and parties. There's, more things at work that you have to consider or be invited to. So it's just a lot more managing of a dense period of social pressures. Yeah.
I think that's so important because I really liked your proposal when we discussed this podcast talking about No-Vember and being able to say no and to be able to kind of set those boundaries. Could you share a little bit um, with us about that? And then we'll talk a little bit about is people pleasing bad and some of those valuations that we make on that.
Yeah. So I think no is for November. It's the time where you're going to have the most challenges in regards to reducing people pleasing. And so it's just a really good opportunity to practice the skills and develop that boundary setting.
I also, I'm curious, as you look at this idea of is people pleasing bad, I think we look at this idea of people, that have had, I'm reading this book by Lindsay Gibson. It's called Children of Emotionally Immature Parents. And the book talks about, these parents that are, disorganized attachment. They're not a secure place to land. Maybe they have some of their own issues where they're not able to fulfill what the book calls this healing fantasy, where the patient, their person is able to sort of get all of their needs met by the parents. And so I think in that book, they talk about it. There's a lot of feelings around people pleasing being bad or thoughts about ourselves as not being connected to parents. When you think about this idea of people pleasing being good or bad, how do you think about that for yourself and your patients?
Well, I mean, just like everything in life, there's no black and white. It's on a spectrum, right? Nothing is, bad. People pleasing, it has its place. It's also incredibly common. I would say most people use it to some level every day, especially in the workplace. And sometimes it can even be useful. So, uh, it's not bad in itself. The challenge is when your level of empathy um, gives you pressure to uh, care for someone else and their needs above your own needs. Okay, so it can be definitely unhealthy, and it can lower your self-worth. So we don't want to use it all the time, but in ACT therapy, for example, I don't know if you're familiar with the beach ball metaphor, but it's just kind of like imagine, being at the pool and all of a sudden there's just this beach ball like keep slapping you and you're like, what? That's super annoying, obviously. You want it to go away, so you just kind of like press it down over here on the water and under the water surface, and it kind of goes away for a second, and then it just pops back up when it slips, and try to do that again. You use more force to like press it down and avoid that uncomfortable thing or push it away because it's bad, and eventually it's going to slip, and when that happens it's going to have even more momentum. So the more momentum, the more pressure you put to avoid it, the more momentum that it has. We actually just want to kind of like gently expose it to us, so that way it can even be sitting there next to you, just so it's not driving the car necessarily. But we don't want to get rid of this part. We don't want to completely avoid it altogether.
And when you think of the attachment styles, I think this is really important because we have these ideas of avoidant attachment. And I think when we were looking at these attachment styles, I just remember in college where they were talking about these ideas of infants and attachment, where the secure attached child will go to the parent, explore, come back. The anxious attachment will, go facilitate back and forth. The avoidant one will just go and completely go on their own. And then there's a disorganized. So I think I really like that image there. When you think about sort of the beach ball experience with ACT, how do you hold that together with these attachment styles that we experience in relationships?
Yeah. So the attack, we were talking about trauma earlier in the fawning response, so that can definitely kind of align with attachment styles. People who are avoidant attachers, they're likely going to feel like their boundaries are intruded far more upon. They're going to put more pressure and they want to like push away a little bit more, so they feel comfortable. And then on the other hand, opposing, we have the anxious attachers. They're more likely affected by the distance and crave that, and so they may actually be the one intruding others' needs for space. So we see this a lot in relationships, like, anxious attachment, avoidant attachment, they're like magnets. So like when people are dating, somehow you're like, oh, it's balance. Yeah, it's usually pretty different attachment styles. And then we also have the disorganized attachment, which is a combination of the two. And you seek intimacy and love, but you push others away. So it can be, um, you know, thinking about that, thinking about the holidays, how close do I want to be to others? Do I want to not go to this party and just avoid it because I don't like the people? Do I go even though it's family because it's family? So there's going to be no advice is like one size fits all for anyone. So there's going to be different things to consider in regards to your attachment style and how you use people pleasing during the holidays. Yeah.
I think one of the things is to make sure that it's not necessarily bad, that there are, like you said, good things that can come of it. But when you sacrifice yourself, when your own soul is sacrificed, or, in IFS, it's called self energy is compromised,
Mhm.
that part becomes bigger than the self. I think it can be really taxing for people. It can be really upsetting. It can also be almost like a drug as well because of this anxiousness that's happening. Um, they feel this need to people please so that they can get their needs for attachment, love, and belonging met. So I think as we discuss these with patients, it's really important to validate that you're your only person that's going to be with you through your whole life. And so if we can attach to self and redirect some of the energy, that will help us. And also, we're here to help other people. I think in the helping professions, right? We want to help people, and so I think as far as boundaries, it's really important there. I think when we talk about boundaries as therapists, it's, in college, they have, the basic class on boundaries and ethics. I'm just curious if you could describe what boundaries are for you. And then I'm just curious, how did you see these boundaries shift, from a concept in college to actual practice,
Mm.
in therapy? So I'm just have those few questions for you.
Yeah, of course. Um, Before I forget, I'll say you're absolutely right about how much do things cost. It costs energy. Okay? And so even going to something that you don't really want to do or is definitely an energy suck, like is it a cup filler or a cup drainer, is gonna just for the sake of socialization even, is gonna cost you far more energy than it would to like manage the sadness or unsatisfaction of not going somewhere or not being invited. So when I started to think of it as an energy exchange, it really shifted my perspective. And I'll say I'm a people pleaser in recovery. I definitely, used people pleasing to stay safe when I was young. I you know, did well and got all the compliments and everything because of my people pleasing. So again, I don't want to get rid of that part. Uh, However, I actually kind of have to give credit to my spouse. They they helped me learn how to say no. Okay. I would say yes to everyone, and I would be so spent. And I also had difficulty accepting help even when it was offered to me. I don't know anybody who has endless energy. I sure as heck don't. So, um, it just that's that's how it has shifted for me. And now I would say I'm a professional boundary setter. It's not something I have challenges with anymore. So there's definitely, a spectrum and, learning to it. So, yeah, definitely life changing because some people are saddened by me saying no, and I ultimately have to do what's best for me.
I think that's so important because we do have, these boundaries with self that we have to maintain, even as helpers, because we spend all these days with people. I think one of the things as my question was, in college, I learned we have, and the only concept I can remember is something called a semi-permeable parameter, where we have this idea of a boundary and it's semi-permeable. We can go through, we can come back, but the parameter is there. And I think that's really important when we're thinking about boundaries. And I mean, even I'm in Idaho, and one of the most common transgressions ethically is sex with patients. And to me, that's just egregious, right? And I think we think of the cases like that, but what are the little boundaries, everyday choices we have to make? And I think those are really important, as far as maintaining our own self energy, specifically in private practice where we have our own latitude. I think, one of my boundaries was in the beginning, I don't see people in the evenings. I have twins. I have a 7-year-old who's an all-star cheer. I have pets and a husband. And so I decided I'm not going to see patients on Fridays. Well, you're in the office on Fridays, aren't you? Yes, I am, but I don't see patients. And that takes some negotiating because lots of people want to Friday appointments. And so I liked what you said about, it's not as difficult. Sometimes there are motivations from family members to get us to spend more time with them or to set those limits. And I've been thinking about this as we've been talking. How do you think about the idea of codependency and people pleasing? Do you feel like they're similar or different?
Good question. I also think it's kind of like a Venn diagram. There's an overlap. There are people who do not fit the criteria for codependent personality disorder or dependent personality disorder. I apologize. That still use people pleasing. I think, most people use it pretty regularly, especially in like work or social situations. Um, However, it's, codependency is definitely has a lot of those traits. I think the added layer to that is really the emphasis on the lowering of self-worth in order to appease others. So that's definitely, also something related. Yeah. I like what you said about, say no on Fridays and stuff like that. I think that's really helpful for a practice also.
And also, it's like my time to, if I want to go home and take a nap or I wanted to do some extra shopping. I used to feel bad when my children were at daycare and I would go and do some things on my own. Like I'm going to run to Costco or I'm going to, go to Michael's and grab a few things. And I thought, that even to me is self-care because I can be intentional. It's so hard in the store to figure out all the choices and do all the things with all of my children. And so, there are times when it's fun for them to be there as well. So really enjoying those times. And I think for my mom guilt, right? It's like, where are your children? And I felt like that idea of like people pleasing, like, oh, as a mom, it's like, oh, I have to be with them. No, it's okay. I can take care of myself. I need that landing time. I'm at home petting my cat. That's what I'm doing.
That's actually funny because that's one of the things that kind of really help push me over to the edge to really focus on boundaries in my own personal therapy. When I was in grad school, I was working full time, went to school, had, my practicum, and I have a deep love for animals. And so I volunteered at like the animal shelter. And I felt so bad because, it'd be Saturday morning and I'd go and then I'd be like, oh, I have to call out. I don't have the energy to do this today. When I would go, I'm just like kind of like little zombie, And so it was this sweet little dog, and I was just petting this little dog, and I was realized that I wasn't actually in the moment. I was just there like, good boy. And just, there was no emotion. It didn't give me anything, and it
Yeah.
didn't give the dog anything. It was for me to have that pressure to keep the commitment wasn't helping either of us. So I think that that's also, I'm talking about like being with your kids, or we should have our own activities. We should have our own time and space away from, our partners, our children, our family members. Um, and definitely that space, between clients. I
Yeah.
have a pretty there's a difference between like rigid boundaries and porous boundaries. One of my rigid boundaries is I have my work hours. They're also, in my email signature, on my voicemail. And I don't work outside of my work hours. There's a few exceptions to that, but those are very specific choices that I make. And when it's time for me to leave for the weekend on Fridays, when I close my computer, I do not open it up and touch it. I need that time and that space for myself in order to keep being able to do this job and be present with clients in the moment. So, yeah, it's really, really important to have those.
And I think, as a new clinician, even people pleasing for my, when I started working um, at a substance abuse clinic, and they had a facility that was outpatient and a facility that was inpatient. And they said, do you want to go work at this inpatient on the weekend after I'd worked a 40-hour week? And I said, no, I can't do that. And I think then I got laid off. And so I was devastated, right? But I started to work on my C there. And then after that, I decided maybe I will be a therapist because my background was macro, community management, social policy. And so I thought, I'm never going to be a clinician. And then when I went to a substance abuse outpatient setting, I just had this internal struggle of like, these people are supposed to be getting better with this evidence-based practice, but we're just kind of not really seeing the results I would like to see as far as resolving trauma. And so I was pregnant with my daughter, and we had groups 2 nights a week till 7:30 p.m. And I thought, yes, I'll do it. I'll put everything into this job. I want them to trust me. I want to be a leader. This is my first real sort of therapy job. And so that ended up now where my boundaries are what you had said is like, nope, I don't work after hours. And my first job was at Child Protection Services. And I really did have to have boundaries there where it's like, I can't, there were the exceptions, but we would be flying to different states, placing children, and the amount of effort that we put in there it was a lot. So I learned very early in my career about how important these boundaries are for self-care and self-preservation
Yeah.
there. I'm curious for you, how did you reduce your people-pleasing activities, or what was that journey like for you?
Well, again, credit to my partner for allowing me to, or helping me to realize that saying no was necessary to protect my self-preservation. I think also it just kind of, clicked for me at certain points when I said, "Oh, I'm very generous. I will do these things for these people." And then when time came for them to support me, if I asked them with reasonable things, and it didn't happen, and I was so devastated because I also kind of realized that the things you would do for others is not necessarily the things others would do for you, and that just felt really, really, really unfair. It was incredibly unfair. relationships are more superficial, less fulfilling in general. And, we're supposed to have relationships to build trust and safety with others. But if you don't have trust and safety, then it's not really a relationship. So it ended up like costing me, and I talk about, energy. I talk about energy a lot. Is it a cup filler or a cup drainer? And, also keep in mind that there's ridges boundaries and porous boundaries, again, also on a spectrum, cup drainers and cup fillers. But, at the end of the day, did that fill you up by going to that dinner? Or was it so socially draining that, it's really taking energy from you? Okay. And then there's things that kind of like balance out, you get a little bit, but you give a little bit, and those are okay too. So, um, yeah, like by avoiding conflict, which I thought was, I'm supposed to be good. I don't get angry. I'm really slow to anger. And yeah, actually developed resentment for quite a few people. And that was on me. That was actually my mistake because I allowed them to not, I didn't communicate what I wanted and needed with them. So how could they meet my needs? And as well as, them not coming through and, for me when I needed them. So yeah, resentment, that one's a tough feeling. And when we get to resentment in a relationship or friendship, it can be really devastating. Actually, I don't know if you knew this, it's on Brene Brown's special.
Oh,
But do you know what the emotion um that is closest to resentment is?
what is it?
Okay, so everybody thinks it's anger, and that's what I would have guessed
Me
before,
too.
but from the Emotion Research Center at Yale, they figured out, and this was on her special again, it's closest to the envy. It's not closest to anger, it's far closer to
Wow.
the, okay? And so if we think about that, it says envy means I want what someone else has. Like I want what I'm giving to other people. And so, resentment in itself is also not a bad thing. It definitely helps us see justice and fairness. Um, and, then it's considering, do you want that person in your life still, right?
And also that moral idea as well of like I should be getting, I don't know if moral is the right word, value maybe. I should be getting what I'm giving. Can't you see how hard I'm working? This martyr kind of idea too. And so I really think that envy idea is a very good point because when we do envy that what we give and I really reflect back on what you were saying in regards to energy as far as I've been learning to test my own energy. If there's something I'm kind of like, I think I want to do this or not, or what am I going to do with my Friday? I have a general idea. I don't really set anything in stone because I'm like trying to just see where my energy's at. Maybe I will. These are some options. Maybe I won't. So really just not for myself committing to something so I can figure out what best needs or fits with me at that time. And those needs that I have, maybe it's sleep, maybe it's I need this errand, maybe it's I need to call a friend or even watching some YouTube videos or whatever, I think that's really important as well.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah, and see, without like setting though, thinking about what I actually need, we begin to lose, our own self-identity. If you have all your social events matching up with some, your partners, you do all the same things, like then it's, do I actually like this, or do I do this because my partner likes this? And when we get to the point of having resentment and then saying like, hey, is this really fair? It helps us build self-awareness, a self-identity, and actually helps you learn to love yourself. So boundaries, really, really help with that.
And it's always about relationships too. I think what you're saying is sometimes, people in our lives either, force us or we've had a really hard situation of like, I really know now why I don't do this behavior anymore or why this is important to me as well. I think sometimes I have to have that lived experience before I can be like, oh, this is my heart. What you had said is what's my porous line or what's my rigid line, to have those more rigid lines of like, no, I need to just leave everything there at the office, shut my phone off, uh, and be able to just breathe a little bit and be able to have myself as a full self giving, to myself. And I think it's just hard, doing momming and owning businesses and making sure that we have enough in our cup. Sometimes I remember when I first like went to a hot tub on my own as self-care, it was like, oh my gosh, who's gonna know? This imposter syndrome. And it was like, it's fine. You can do this, go swim, take a break, relax. You tell your clients to do it all the time.
Yeah. Practice what you preach, right?
Uh-huh. And so I think in this season of people pleasing, some steps you can take are to really reflect on your needs and do what you had said. Like, is this really something that I want, or am I other centered, I guess, in this idea? Am I doing it because I think I should or because they want it? And I think that's really important as we kind of go through. Um, that would be a first step. The other step maybe would be to be able to figure out, is this relationship a giver or is it something that's taking? Is it a give and take, or is this person just a taker? I saw a TikTok and they were talking about 5 things about people in your life, and one of them is, are you living to meet their needs? Do they ever meet your needs back? And when you stop meeting their needs, they're gone. And I thought, okay, so really recognizing those types of relationships that maybe you're giving to, evaluating what are you getting though? Because sometimes that can feel selfish, but there's a difference between self-care and selfish. And like you had said, sometimes people don't like it and we have to be okay with that. Like, yeah, that's my limit and sorry, but that's as far as we go.
Definitely. Yeah. It's really important to understand your needs, especially, being a therapist. It's a really energy draining job. It takes a lot. Some people sit in a meeting and it might be boring. It's also different to, at work, it's also different to sit in a session and connect with someone and mirror them and put your personal things on the side. It takes a lot of energy. So really identifying, and again, we learned this through practice of like, oh, why do I keep doing this to myself? What your needs are, what you need to stay healthy, where especially alone time, some people may want to socialize. And I do enjoy socialization to a certain extent. However, I need a lot of alone time. So, if I know I have a busy week and someone's like, oh, let's do this on the weekend, and I'll be like, I'll respond and I'll be like, I'll pencil it in, but I have, ABC this week. And, if I'm too tired, I won't be able to go, or will need to drive, not walk, or, I have some, flexibility in regards to things. But knowing what I need to stay healthy is
Yeah.
definitely a step. Yeah.
What would you
I
say to our, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there.
yeah.
What would you say to our listeners for a few other tips if they're struggling with this?
Well, I think like I suggest some people is we actually like write down on Post-its, what are your needs?
Oh,
Um,
good.
what are the other things that are on there? You have maybe, this event you're hosting for work. You have a family gathering. You have, your own sleep, your own, laundry and cooking and all these things. And you put and just kind of like move them around and actually just concrete, like look at it and visualize it and see it in your brain to say like, okay, where's my number one? Where's my number two? obviously there's going to be a little bit of flexibility and some things are going to shift a little bit. However, knowing what's most important to you, well, is sleep more important to me, or is this, once in a lifetime concert more important to me? Well, you get to decide what works for you, but really focus on what matters most to you, and identify those values. That value identification is really helpful. Um, Also, people pleasing, we're talking about setting boundaries. Don't feel obligated to accept every invitation. Don't, it's not helpful to feel the pressure to participate in every tradition. It's perfectly acceptable to allocate your time and energy to what you find most valuable. And when you're saying yes to someone else and it means no to you, that's going to be definitely an energy sucker, right? Like that's draining the cup. And so it is okay to say no gracefully. I also think this is something like modeling is really, really helpful with, when people see that you are able to set these boundaries, say no gracefully. It, gives them examples and they learn by it and they can practice it. So I come from a family where it was like, it was on the calendar, it's happening. Like there's no flexibility. And
There was no penciling in.
there was no penciling in. It was hard, it was a hard line. It was, if you're sick, you still go to work. And I think maybe some things changed since, the pandemic in regards to tolerance of people being sick, but really that's not helping you. Obviously you're sick, but it's also like putting other people in jeopardy of being sick. So this pressure to say yes and do things that really don't benefit us and benefit others, we gotta role model that for others to do, because that way is not helpful and is dying. So I also think like over apologizing, that tends to happen, especially when you're like, oh no, I can't do this because I have to do this and this and this. And I'm like, I'm really sorry. And I really want to, and just, you don't need to apologize. You can, and when you actually do that, it communicates to the person that you're trying to set the boundary with that your boundary is very porous, like the sponge, right? There's a lot of wiggle room. They can more easily push for their needs to get met, and you'll fold more easily, right? So we don't really need to justify anything. Also, no is a complete sentence. They don't need to understand your boundary, they just need to respect it. So you can say like, I won't be attending the holiday party this year. No, that's it. You don't have to.
You're saying this, let your yeses be yeses and your nos be nos.
Yeah, yeah. If yeah, you don't, that nobody needs to know your life story or justification as to what or why you do things.
That's
So
a really important one because a lot of people are like, well, I'm not in a place to do that right now. And that's enough. I think we want to over apologize, or I think I've been hearing this idea of over functioning as well, to be like people pleasing. I'll give all this energy out. And then in the end, it's like you don't have any inputs. And so I've been thinking about this over functioning idea as well. It's part of people pleasing, and also just validating like you did good, you did set your boundary, that was great, for yourself, be your own internal cheerleader of like you're making progress. Maybe you didn't win that battle with this boundary, but look what else you did.
right,
That's really important, that self-validation, because sometimes we can feel like, oh my gosh, this people pleasing thing is so huge, I'm never gonna set all these boundaries in all these situations. Just start small, start with one, validate what you're already doing. I think that's really important. So we fill up that adaptive information and EMDR sense. So
yeah,
we can begin to explore that a little bit more.
definitely. And definitely review your progress regularly, because sometimes, especially when working on reducing people pleasing, it feels really slow or impossible. It, However, just with all progress, it's usually like four steps forward, one step back. Just keep in mind that you are actually still one step ahead of where you were. So you know, keep being that cheerleader, keep reviewing your progress to build the momentum, because there can definitely be some challenges and setbacks with it. And I think it's also like helpful to just, have the knowledge that healthy relationships require difficult conversations. So getting used to the discomfort, because a big motivation for people struggling with people pleasing is the conflict avoidance. I don't want to start a problem. I don't want to make someone else upset. So really, know your values, state your boundaries, state them beforehand if you can also, if you
Yeah,
of like, I have to leave at this time today. That's going to be better than, 8:59 rolls around and you'd be like, I got to leave. And then people are like, what's going on? So
that's a good point too. Yeah.
have those, you know, ideas and boundaries determined ahead of time. And when you avoid the comfort or try to do the Irish goodbye, stuff like that, it's just the beach ball. You just keep pushing it back up. It's just going to come back up with more intensity every single time. So it actually grows the anxiety and increases conflict avoidance when we don't do that. So yeah.
So any last tips for our listeners that you would like to share, some parting thoughts or things maybe that you'd like to say before we surrender you to your Thursday?
Okay. Um, yeah, sure. Some tips and tricks. Okay. Number one, when I'm working with clients, I will say your perception is skewed. Okay. Your perception that you have is based on your past experiences and others' past experiences with you.
Mhm.
So if you are expected to be nice and you're slightly away from one step away from that, then that's going to feel like a giant leap for you and others. Okay. It's actually kind of funny because there's a trend on social media about being in people pleasers, like being in their villain era.
Oh,
And so, it's a thing like, oh, and then somebody claps back and they're like, this is just somebody politely setting healthy boundaries. So it feels very grand for you and maybe the person you're setting the boundary with. However, from the outside, it just looks like, no, I'm sorry, I can't do that. Uh,
wow. Yeah.
so your perception is definitely skewed. Set the expectations early. It's easier than bringing it up later and trying to decide and manage and convince people. No, just say like, okay, this is what's going to happen. Or okay. I like role playing. Role play with the trusted friend, with your therapist. The more you can strengthen that neural pathway,
Yeah.
the easier it becomes, right? Practice best case scenario. So usually it's kind of like, oh, okay, I wanted to put there, but okay, cool. Um, then practice that worst case scenario, you know. So I also, say start with small changes. You mentioned that very, very, very important because if you come into like family dinner with like gunslinging, that is not going to go over well at all. Start with coworkers, start with friends. Jumping into the lion's den is going to, be a lot more challenging. Professional people, professional knower. Okay, I am, and I can still run into challenges with my family in regards to boundary setting or people pleasing. It's just there's the toughest crowd. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, also, and I don't, this is not usually a challenge for people pleasers. Just respect is a two-way street. Validate their needs. We need that for constructive communication. Try to use I statements, things like that. When we put up this huge rigid boundary, yeah, and it's new also, it can become more of an argument, right? So let's see. A couple more tips. Use somatics to give you clues. So think
Okay.
back to like past situations, and I have my family members, they tell this story about me in regards to my weight when I was little. And oh man, I would just think about it. My cheeks would just be like so red and flushed and everything.
Oh,
And so when I'm sitting with my family members and I feel my cheeks get red and hot, I'm like, ooh, that's my cue. Okay. So I know that's when I need a boundary set. And I was like, I've asked you not to say that story before, um, that's that time to assert yourself because your body is the thing that sends the chemicals to your brain to interpret, right?
yeah.
So your body will always know before your brain does. Um, make sure to seek support. So maybe check in with friends or talk before or after events and everything with the holidays. And then also check with them to make sure you're not trauma dumping, just be
Yeah.
like, hey, this crazy situation happened at my house. Is it okay if I talk to you about this? So, boundaries in regards to what we do and share as well. Take alone time, go take breaks in the bathroom or in the car if you have to. Say no, relax at home. Be as gentle to your nervous system as possible. And I think this is also like really important. If you're hosting and cooking is really stressful for you, yeah, that's not going to be a good conducive environment to help practice boundary setting, right? Sleep well the night before, get a massage if you have to, delegate tasks, order a catered meal, okay? The more tapped out your nervous system is, the much harder it is going to be to develop these boundary setting skills. Lastly, they make noise reduction earbuds. So I work with a lot of people on the autistic spectrum or the autistic array, and sensory challenges can come up. So if you use earbuds that reduce the sound that is received, but you can still hear. There's brands like Loop or Decibels. It reduces that, and that really, really can help with reducing triggers. Or you can set a on your smartwatch. You can set a decibel monitor, and being in environments over 70 decibels is can exposure to that can
Oh,
lead to
I didn't
hearing
know that.
loss.
That's good.
Yeah, so set that on there, and that's your reminder. So you see this little decibel meter going up. Normal conversations like kind of about 60, but when you're like, oh, when it goes to 70, that's when I need to leave the situation. That's when I need to leave the room. That's when I need to take a break, or yelling, shouting. If it gets to like that, yeah, not necessary to be there. And then also I want to say stay safe. So if loosening the boundary keeps you physically safe, that should always be your priority.
Yes.
There's some people that no matter how capable of communication you and compromise you are, it will not be effective, okay, to try and set boundaries. And then I guess it goes back to like how important is it to have this person in your life and explore those values. But yeah, I mean, that's those kinds of things are really going to help you manage the stress over the holidays.
And there's so many nuggets here, right? So I think what you have said is so much good information today. We certainly could go on, of course.
Oh, yeah.
And I just want to recognize you personally and let you know we value you. We value your work. We thank you for all of this wonderful content and the people that you serve and the lives that you change. I think we don't hear that enough. So I just wanted to let you know that we see you and you matter, and just want to say thank you to you there. So we will go ahead and turn our time over, Kathy, with Rewired 360, your EMDR University, and we will see you next time. Take care.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.